What's going on? So I am here checking out a really interesting trike. It's made me smile. It's also made me laugh, and I can't wait to tell you a little bit more about it because it's rather unique. So let's go ahead and jump in. So what we got here is the Eunorau new trike. That's the name of this vehicle, and yeah, it has a fairly interesting combination. So it's a trike, of course, so it's got fairly wide wheelbase of about 39 inches or so in the back, but it's also a folding electric trike. So it's got a motor up in the front wheel, little basket in the front, big basket in the back, and also this breakaway point right here with the latch so it can fold. But as you can tell from the size of the vehicle in general, magic is. That's where there's a lot of stuff going on. So we'll start with the tire. Well, tires, all three are the same. It's a 20-inch by 3. So it's a 20-inch diameter on the wheel, a 3-inch width on the tire, but the height of the sidewall brings it up quite a bit. So it's actually more like a 24 almost. No, not quite a 24, maybe like a 23 or so, if such a size exists. From end to end, from rubber to rubber. So this gives you a fair amount of grip on the trail or on the sidewalk that you're on. On the back end also is the set of brakes. So you actually have a mirrored set of brakes both front to back, which is a 160 mechanical disc brake from a smaller name company. I think it's Z-Star. It's just a small company that makes brakes, and then they brand them with whatever name you want on them. But these are 160 millimeter rotors, both on the back and on the front, as well as on the other side. So these brakes are kind of cool because you got two sets of brakes on the back, so it actually has a fair amount of stopping power if you only use the back, if you so desire. So that's actually kind of a neat thing, and I'll show you the splitter, actually a splitter between the two. We'll get up to that in a second. But while we're back here, let's quickly mention the 14 by 28 Shimano cassette with a Shimano tourney. In the back you have the fenders. These are kind of a flat metal that's kind of curved, or well, it's a straight metal that's flattened out, kind of giving these little curves right here on either end. Pretty strong on there, and it follows the curvature of the tire as well. Pretty high profile as well, or clearance above there, kind of floats. These fenders are attached to the frame of the basket rather than to the hub or the anything else attached to the fork or anything, because there is no fork in the back. In the back area, you have a little cargo spot. This cargo spot is pretty interesting because it has this board on here that can carry stuff. You can put some straps on here if you wanted to carry something fairly tall, but actually turned back, or it's a little bit recessed, so to speak, from the rider. So the rider, if you can kind of imagine, is occupying that space right there. They can sit upright just fine and have cargo that's even fairly tall that is extending upwards. So you can get a fair amount of stuff back there, and the total capacity of this vehicle is about 300 pounds from what I'm told, which is a lot. You can get a lot on there. The front basket, we'll kind of mention that real brief. The front basket doesn't carry quite as much, but it still is fairly strong because it mounts with 4 bolts to the frame itself. So you could get something in there, and you have a fair amount of clearance as well. The handlebars are up in this spot, so even if you have something a little bit taller, say a speaker or something like that, you could still get full steering on there. It's quite common to see a front basket for bikes kind of up by the handlebars a little bit, and so you can't steer quite as extreme if such be the case. But let's go ahead and continue on with the back end. So I was talking about how the basket is a little bit pushed back, and that's due to the long seat stays and chain stays here that give you a little bit more space to work with. And this is the splitter that I was talking about. So with one lever, you pull on the right hand lever, this will actuate both brakes at the same time, which is kind of cool. That way, if for some reason you had control of one hand to squeeze like that, you could just use the back brake with both of those and you'd be all right. So that's kind of neat. There is a longer chain. I believe it's a zinc covered chain. It's a little bit longer to accommodate the longer set of metal here on the seat stay and chain stay. That's coming up to the 44 tooth chain ring up in the front, which gives you a pretty good ratio for tension. Of course, a 170 millimeter crank, square taper, no surprises there. So one thing I do like about this trike is the seat. The seat has a pretty wide profile, about 8 inches or so on the footprint, and it has a fair amount of gel on the top, so it's pretty darn comfy. There's springs on the bottom there, so this seat is really good for sitting down and using the throttle. So good choice there. It step through portion, this is pretty darn low. I mean, this has got to be somewhere around 20 inches. We have the full measurements and specifications on electricbikereview.com, where you can see the full write-up for this bike, by the way. But this is and we have this measurement too, down to the inch, or quarter of an inch actually. But this is pretty low. It's not a lot of folks who can't get their leg that high. That's a little bit higher than a stair. So you can get over there and actually step into the bike pretty easily. And that's a pretty cool aspect about this trike, is that it's very approachable. You know, a lot of people could just jump on this thing and get going. So continuing on with the frame up in here, I do have a folding stem, and I could show you about the folding ass, talk a little bit more about the front end before we get into that. On the stem, this is a telescoping and folding stem, so the stem does fold. We'll get to that. It also telescopes. So this end right here comes up and you can kind of cinch it down, and then shabams. Now you have a much higher riding position if you wanted to put your weight back of the rider, kind of keep your arms out a little bit. So that's actually kind of neat. You can do that on the fly, super easy, which is cool if you want to bike with other people. You can adjust this, you can adjust the seat on the fly, and that way a lot of different people this single vehicle can accommodate, which is neat. Handlebars are fairly narrow. That's kind of typical for a folding bike. In this case, I don't know if it was entirely necessary. They could have gone a little bit longer just because of the total width of the vehicle in the first place. And don't have a whole lot of real estate up here, but you do have everything necessary. Got your display, got your brake handles, your shifter, a bell, a throttle, and also the grips. All of that's up here, so you got all the necessities right up front. These grips are kind of a friction mounted. They do have like an ergonomic edge to them, so that's kind of nice. And of course the brakes also have a motor inhibitor. These are like a big long 4-finger lever, so you can totally get your whole hand on there if you need to. This is the indexer for the gears that we talked about in the back. You don't have any gears up front, just the ones in the back. Bell, I think you know how that works. And the display, we will cover that when we get to the electric system. One last thing is this latch right here on the tippy top. That will allow you to adjust the handlebars on this axis, which the point of it is to allow better folding. It kind of comes as a package with this stem when they source this. But when you undo that, you can actually fold the handlebars down so that the brakes are kind of out of the way, and then you kind of give it a really slim, kind of a slim line here as you fold the handlebars down all the way. But for me, I usually wind up using this because I want to adjust where the brake handles are. If the brake handles are too high, you know, in an extreme position like this, you wind up riding around with your hands up like you're waving at somebody. But you generally want to have them in a more natural position. So actually fine-tune that quite a bit. And that's also necessary if you're going to increase or decrease the height of the handlebars in the first place. So yeah, the more you know. So the last couple things to talk about on the front end. There is another fender just like the back. This one does not have the, like I mentioned prior, the bridge that kind of mounts to the bottom of the fork. So that's an interesting thing about it. Definitely gives it a different look up here. But you do have a mirrored set of brakes, tires, wheels. The spokes are a little bit stronger. These are actually a 12 gauge spoke up front because they have to handle the energy that's coming from the motor up here. Yeah. It's pretty fun stuff. So let's go ahead and talk about the electric system a little bit. This is a 500 watt motor up in the front with a 750 max. So that puts out a fair amount of power, and it's definitely necessary for a heavier vehicle like this. This thing weighs 80 pounds itself, not including the rider. So it's a pretty big beast. And if you intend to load it up on the back with some cargo, which we are going to do in a little bit, then yeah, it's quite a bit of quite a bit of power necessary to carry that out. And of course you got the mirrored set of brakes. I think I mentioned that. The continuing on with the electric system, so this is one kind of oversight that, you know, I wasn't too thrilled about. The light is mounted to this metal bar right here on the fork, which is fine to be mounted on a metal bar like this. Unfortunately, you can see that it comes into contact with the bottom of the basket. So that forces the light down unless I bend the bar in some other way. But then, you know, there's not a whole lot of space, not a whole lot of clearance in between the fender and the bottom of the basket there. So this is kind of the best I could get on kind of a short notice as far as mounting it. So it's kind of pointed down, so at least half of this light is being consumed by the, the front of the fender there. So it's not the best option, but it is there. It does have a front light. You will see a little bit more out of the front. But yeah, that mounting spot right there is not ideal. Perhaps in a later production run they will have a different mount. Perhaps they'll extend the wire here and have it mount to the front. That might actually be what this plate is for. I thought it was for like a vanity thing if you wanted to put a sticker on the front, but I personally would rather have the light mounted up here. So perhaps, like I said, in another production run they'll get this kind of squared away, but as it stands, it's an oversight. There's no other way to put it. With the electric system, we do have a throttle that powers the front wheel, which is pretty fun. I always love me a throttle. This is a twist throttle, and it actually is tied to the level of pedal assist that you're so in this case, on the display, we'll go ahead and jump there. On the display, it has all the basics, has your speed, the battery level on 5 bars, and also your pedal assist on the right side. Pressing the plus or minus button will change the amount of pedal assist that you're getting from the cadence sensor, but it also caps the throttle. So if you have it in pedal assist level 1, the throttle also will go to about 13 miles an hour or so. And then when you increase pedal assist level 2, the throttle will now go up to, I don't know, 16 miles an hour. I'm kind of pulling numbers out of a hat from here on out. And then it goes up to level 5. And at level 5, you have maximum pedal assist and you have access to the full power band from the throttle itself. So they are tied together. Keep that in mind. The other orientation is if the throttle has full power all the time. That's called throttle override, if you're curious. So the display is fairly simple and easy to use. I kind of showed you a little bit about what it has. The plus and minus buttons are pretty easy to get the hang of. On the bottom there is a power button and also a mode button. If you press the mode button, it will cycle through a few metrics: your average speed, max speed, trip set, an odometer, a timer, things like that. Fun stuff. And the power button, of course, if you press and hold that, it'll turn it on or off. If you press and hold the plus button, that will actually turn on the lights. So it turns on that front light that I told you is kind of obstructed. It'll turn on a back light for the display itself, as well as this rear light way in the back. And I like the rear light being integrated into the main battery pack. It means you don't have to switch batteries on them, so it's really convenient. And of course, you press and hold plus button and that turns it back off again. So that's how to use a display.